Welcome back. In this video, we're going to start on the navbar for Museum of Candy. So I have the index.html open, and I'm going to open it up in my browser as well. Currently nothing to look at. So let's start with an easy win. Let's give the body the background color. So I'm going to open up my app.css as well. I want both of these open. So in app.css, I'm just going to select the body, and the background color is a hex code, which is F5D9DF. F5D9DF. And we'll save and refresh. All right, we officially have the pink background going. Now let's get to work on the navbar. So the markup for the navbar, I always struggle to remember. I'm looking at it right now on a different screen, so I'm cheating. Don't feel bad if this doesn't come naturally. So we make a nav, and going to give it a couple of classes. The first is just navbar, and then because the text is light on this navbar, especially if you can see it better here if I scroll, we want to give it the class of navbar dark. And then if we give it bg dark just to start, so we can just see what we're working with, we're going to remove this, but it will make it easier to see what we're doing. Then we have to decide where it should expand. And if you watch this navbar, it shrinks, so it's collapsed on extra small and small, then we hit medium and it expands. So that's what we want to do. So that's just navbar dash expand MD. And then we can start with that, not stop. And I like to give my navbar an ID because sometimes you might have more than one. It's not that often, but you might have a fixed one at the footer. You might have a sidebar. So I'm going to give it the ID of just main navbar or something like that. Then inside of it, we have our navbar brand that just says candy. Then we have home, about, and tickets, which are different links. Okay, so we'll start with the navbar brand. So A with the class of navbar-brand. And we'll leave the href just with the hash sign for now. And we're just going to type candy in all caps. Now we have the problem of the navbar toggler markup, and there's a lot that goes into that. So we're going to make a button, and this is just coming from the docs. That button has a class of navbar-toggler. I think it used to be toggle. Now it's toggler in Bootstrap 4. Then we're going to tell it data toggle equals collapse. So this just says that this is going to collapse something. Then we have to tell it what it's going to collapse. So data target. Well, we don't have that set up yet. So we'll come back. The next thing we're going to do is add the span that has the class of navbar toggler icon. Navbar-toggler icon inside that button. So now we should at least have a button showing up at the right size right there. It's just, it's not working because there's nothing for it to collapse yet. We have to fill this in. So after that button, I'm going to make a div, and I'm going to give it the class of collapse, and I'm going to give it the class of navbar-collapse, and then also an ID, and then I'm going to reference that ID as the data target. So what would make sense as an ID for this? I would just say nav links maybe, because that's what is collapsing, right? It's these links here. You can't see them anymore. So we'll go with nav links. And then up here, I need to say data target is nav links. It needs to match, and I need to say that it's an ID because we don't have to do it through an ID. Okay, then we're going to go and add in our actual nav inside of this navbar. So just 3 links right here. And the markup for that is we can do a UL. We could do a nav. It's up to us. I'm going to do a UL with the class, of navbar-nav. Again, this is mainly coming from the docs. And then inside of it, I'm going to add in an li with the class of nav item. And then inside of each one of those, we gave an anchor tag with the class of nav link. So the first link was, what is it? Home, about, and then tickets. So we'll start with home. It's all caps. Technically, we could lowercase everything and then uppercase it using CSS or using even Bootstrap, but I'm just going to leave that. So home, about, and tickets, and save. and we should at least have some content collapsing. Cool. So that part's working now, and it should expand. We're getting our content. We'll worry about the CSS as far as the font, the color as well, and then also the size. You'll notice that these links are larger than what I have here. We also changed the hover color and all of that. One thing I do want to do is go to the button and make it more accessible. So this navbar button, it doesn't actually have a label to explain what it is. There's no text on it. It's 3 lines. And to human eyes, we understand what that means. But if we're not viewing this website with our eyes, if we're using a screen reader, for example, this is not very meaningful at all. We don't know what clicking this does. So what we can do is come into here to the button itself and add in a class, called aria, or it's not a class, add in an attribute, aria-label, and then we'll just say what it does. Toggle navigation or toggle navbar or something. And functionally, there will be no difference that we can perceive, assuming I don't mess up the quotes. There we go. So it looks the same. It's just to make it a little easier to understand what it does. All right, so that's it for the markup portion. We now have to go in and deal with all the CSS. And the first thing we could do is remove this background color. The only problem with that is that this pink is so light, it's kind of hard to tell what's going on. Compare it to this blue, which some people might still think this is a bit difficult to read. And in that case, we could darken this image in Photoshop or something. We could even do an overlay on top. But this, or you could just change the text color, of course. But I think it looks okay. But this is a little harder to read. But let's go to CSS. So our app.css file, we've already changed the background color of the body. Now we have a couple of things to alter. First, our main icon here, that's not even an icon, the navbar brand is red. And it's also a larger font size, and also the font of everything is different. So why don't we start by changing the font? So in the body, which we've already changed the color of, I'm going to say font family is the Google font that I imported already for you called Nunito, something like that. And we'll save, pay close attention here. It's kind of hard to tell, but the font did just change. I promise it did. Next, we're going to alter the brand, which is supposed to be, if I zoom out, supposed to be larger and red. So the navbar brand, instead of altering all navbar brands using that class, I'm going to say inside of my main navbar, we gave it that ID, if you remember, the navbar brand inside of that, navbar-brand. So a nested selector like that. And then I'm going to change the color, first of all, which the color is EA1C2C. EA1C2C. It's a nice red color. And you can see that that's already taking effect. I'm also changing the font size. So the font size is 1.5 rems. It's a little bigger. Now the last change, it might be hard to tell on the screencast, but the font weight itself is lighter here. This is a very lightweight font, and this is thicker. So we can change that to do font-weight 100. Oh, refresh the wrong page. There we go. So now it's a lot thinner. Now I'd also like to get this to change font weight as well, and font size. And this works well, except for the fact that I also want to make these larger. You notice that they are all the same size, and these are lighter weight as well. So instead of doing navbar brand and then separately doing the font size and font weight to do the same thing for the actual nav links, what I can do is just say everything in the main navbar should have font size of 1.5 rems and font weight of 100, and I can remove it from here. We still need to keep the color here for the navbar brand because it's the only red thing. Okay, so now we're getting on the right track. I guess that's what I'm saying. It's looking a little better. You'll notice that this kind of bothered me. The default color when you do navbar dark is not white. It's like a transparent white, and you hover and it turns white. So to make them true white, we need to manually select them. So I'm going to put this first here, and then it doesn't matter at all, but I'm going to say main navbar and select those links, which if you need a refresher, each link is nav-link. So I'm going to do nav-link inside of main navbar. I'm going to set the color to be white. And now they are fully solid white, but we can't tell when we're hovering. So I'm going to make them turn this color when we hover. So I'm going to duplicate this, but then add in the pseudo selector hover, which if you're not familiar with that, it just says whatever is in here, you should apply when we hover over this element. So if I did something like background purple, as I hover, the background changes to purple. But what we want is just to change the text color. So color is this red that I copied from the navbar brand. And now I hover and it turns red. Cool. So what else do we have to worry about? There's a small thing. It might be hard to tell, but this has less padding. If we actually inspect the navbar here and where it actually, I'm going to go full screen, where it takes up the space. Let's go to the navbar. Here we go. Notice that it's all blue with a little green on the sides. I don't know if I can't point that out very easily. But now if we look at the navbar over here that we're working on, if I inspect it, there's also padding on top. See that green on top and bottom? So I'm going to remove that padding on the top and the bottom so that we get a narrower navbar. And that's easy because we now have that padding utility. I can go to my navbar and just say padding P, and I want Y because that's top and bottom. I could do padding top 0, padding bottom 0, or padding Y 0, and that does both of them for me. Watch closely here. You'll see as I refresh, it just shrinks down a bit. It's closer to the top. There's not so much padding. It's a very slight change. It's not very obvious, but it is one that I did. Now there's another thing that we can't really tell at the moment. This navbar is not fixed to the top. This one is. As I scroll, it stays up there. Well, I don't have content to scroll through right now, so it's not going to stay at the top, or I'm sorry, it is going to stay at the top no matter what. But if I added some content in, just to show you, you don't need to do this, but let's just say I add a div, and inside of this div, I add like lorem 1000. Is that going to be enough? Nope. Let's see. I'm trying to make this work better. How about I add a container, I add a row, I add a column 6 or maybe 4, and inside of that, I'm going to do a ton of content, lorem 1000. Again, you don't need to do this. But now you see I scroll and my navbar is not fixed. So in Bootstrap, there's a really easy way to make it stay at the top. We just say fixed top and refresh the page. Now we have this problem. Our content goes on top. We'll worry about that in a little bit, but you'll see that it stays up there. Now it's kind of weird because this is all on top of it, but our content is working, or our content is working. That makes no sense. Our navbar is fixed to the top. That part's working. And it looks good enough. So I'm going to now delete all of this at the bottom and just go back to what we had. And I'm going to leave the video off here. We do still have to tackle this little thing where it changes color, but I'm going to wait because we actually have to write some JavaScript for that. And don't worry, you don't have to be good with JavaScript. It's just a little thing that you can copy and paste in. But I want to wait until we have more content to fill out the page anyway so that we can trigger it. So that's it for the navbar now. Let's just make sure it collapses correctly. We have our icon here. Still get the hover effect. The font is lice. Oh my goodness. I need to take a break. The font is nice and light, not lice. And we change the color. It's transparent. Yeah, it's looking good enough to start. Next up, we're going to tackle the rest of this sort of heading section, including this Museum of Candy monolith.